Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Using my sportscasting background, I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players to gain more insight on what makes this team go. As the Detroit Lions enter a new gritty era, we'll look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we're going to preview the NFC North, taking a closer look at the Chicago Bears with a guest who follows the franchise. We do a quick dive into the Chicago roster, hear thoughts on the Detroit Lions from a division rival, and discuss projected NFC North standings. Information that will help you fully prepare for the 2023 NFL season.
This is Corey Schlesinger, and you are listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
I'm joined today by Michael Tilka. He's a sports anchor for the CBS affiliate WIFR TV out of Rockford, Illinois. Thanks for joining the show today, Michael.
Matt, thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. It's good to finally be back. You're so close. Really, really love this time of year.
But yeah, it's great to have football back. Let's talk about the Chicago Bears. Let's briefly look at last year. The Bears had a down year last year. How surprised were you that it went that way for your team?
Yeah, I remember I was talking with friends who also follow teams in the NFC North and obviously have a good familiarity with the Bears. And I know we were talking and saying, heading into the last year, that they had the expectation that the Bears were going to be the worst team in the NFL. And I think to start the year, they have that really crazy week one victory against a team like San Francisco and that absolute monsoon. And, I was thinking, this is a team that maybe won't be the worst in the league, but could, get a couple wins, maybe not reach the playoffs. But I think you saw as the year went on that it was a year that management was okay with kind of scrapping in terms of building toward the future. Obviously, a really busy training camp in terms of the Roquan Smith question. You saw the moves with him to trade him to Baltimore. You saw a couple of other trades as well, the acquisition of Chase Claypool. So once there was that realization of point pretty early on that this team wasn't making the playoffs, the team wasn't going to do anything too crazy, then you started having that conversation about 2023, 2024. And I think that was completely fine. You had a brand new general manager and Ryan Poles, a brand new head coach, and Matt Eberflus. He had a sophomore quarterback in Justin Fields. I was fine with the way that things played out because look where it landed them. Landed them the first overall pick in the NFL draft. During the moment, it's not fun to have a 3-win season, but you can understand where the vision was, where this team was going. They had direction, even though the year wasn't quite as good as Bears fans were hoping or expecting. They understood, they trusted, and they got where this team was going just in terms of the scope of things and where their sort of window is, I guess.
All right, well, looking at the team from last year, there's been some departures. As you already mentioned, Roquan Smith, key linebacker, was traded. David Montgomery left via free agency this offseason to the Detroit Lions. Have there been any other key losses that you would say from last year?
I would say that's about it. There's a great the Bears website has a great free agency offseason tracker. The number of Bears that were lost to free agency, I can count on one hand. The number was 4, including David Montgomery. And even then, I was looking at David's stats last night and pulling him up again. He had a solid year last year, but it's such an interesting point with conversations regarding running backs. Because obviously, if David Montgomery would have came back to the Bears, I think Bears fans would have been happy. I think they would have been cool with him coming back. I think he's productive. He's great. But you don't have to get too caught up with your running backs because there's always talent you can either pull from free agency or you can find in the draft. They addressed that this year. They picked up Roschon Johnson in the 4th round, who's a player I think could be really, really productive as a RB2 or an RB3, and a guy who didn't get a lot of shine because he was playing behind Bijan Robinson at Texas. And with Khalil Herbert sliding up in that running back 1 spot, and he kind of was running back 1 towards the end of the season, kind of tying back into my last response, that was something that Bears fans were okay with, of just addressing their future and letting a couple guys go here and there. And even then, when you're a 3-14 season, there can't be a lot of talent you're losing to free agency or to a trade when you're that bad. So I think Lions fans should certainly be excited and interested in David Montgomery. I think he's going to be a great contributor, but obviously just with that weird first round that the Lions went through this year, and taking that running back from Alabama, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Jahmyr Gibbs.
Jahmyr Gibbs, yeah. And, just sort of like you went out and got David Montgomery, yet you're using your first pick in this draft on a running back like that. What does that say about your running back room? So I think if I'm a Lions fan, I'm certainly confused about that. I'm not sure what sort of your perspective and take on that Lions running back room, because I just sit there and I just remember on draft night, I'm like, why is that the move that you're going with right now?
Well, we will get to that towards the end of the show, because I definitely have some thoughts I'd be happy to share with you on that.
Yeah.
I'm not shocked about not a lot of losses from the Bears team, because like you said, with that team, you're not going to lose a ton of players. But let's talk key additions, because with the Bears' salary cap situation going into the offseason, they had a ton of space. They had extra draft capital from trading back with Carolina. They gained picks. They also gained former University of Maryland wide receiver DJ Moore in the trade. You guys signed Tremaine Edmonds from Buffalo. There's a big get. Were there any other big additions via free agency? Not the draft yet, but just free agency guys you picked up, you feel?
Yeah, like you said, the big ones being Tremaine Edmonds, DJ Moore. But I think another really interesting piece would definitely have to be TJ Edwards. He's a Chicagoland area guy as well, also played linebacker and coming from Philadelphia. And I think that's been a really interesting group to watch. You know, the best linebacker in the Bears core last season was an undrafted rookie out of Wisconsin, Jack Sanborn, another local Chicago guy. This team actually has 5 sort of Chicagoland natives. That's a fun storyline to follow, but I digress. So this group went from a group like that to getting a guy like Edmonds, getting a guy like TJ Edwards. And, you know, this is a group that a lot of people are thinking that not only are they a good group, this could be a top 5, top 3 linebacking core with those 3. They bolstered their offensive line as well. They picked up Nate Davis from the Tennessee Titans. He's been dealing with some injuries and some participation issues. I'm not exactly sure what the situation is there, but he fills into an interior offensive line that desperately needs help. Those are sort of the main ones that stick out of my mind when thinking about free agency. So it's been a really fun offseason for this team.
All right, and so free agency is just one component to making a team better. The other part is the draft. Having the number 1 overall pick, trading to Carolina, as we mentioned, trading back again. The Bears went offensive tackle in the first, defensive tackle and defensive back in the second. Thoughts on those early picks and or anyone else in the draft that you liked coming out and you were excited about those draft picks?
Yeah, I think the big one was that a lot of people were thinking that Northwestern offensive tackle Peter Skoronski was going to be that Bears top 10 pick, was an All-American left tackle at Northwestern. Obviously, staying close to the city of Chicago, certainly not a bad thing. He's a native, but there was a lot of concerns regarding him and just arm length in general. It sounds like he's actually going to be an offensive guard in the NFL. And the only 2 major spots were center and right tackle to sort of be addressed in terms of just starters. And so I know a lot of people were excited about the idea of Darnell Wright. And certainly one of the most consistent players in the SEC in a conference like that, and being a part of such a good, productive offense. And I think he was really a great decision in that first round. And you mentioned those day 2 picks, and I think that's where a lot of sort of interest is raised in terms of where this draft lies, because I think that's where the only place where fans and media and likewise had those concerns, because they all went on defense. And I think the biggest thing was that after they picked up Darnell Wright, was continuing to address the helps and needs for Justin Fields to set him up to be successful. So obviously still concerns, but just really, really interesting going with the Bears virtually had 3 second-round picks. Their 3rd round pick was number 64 overall. And in a lot of years, that would be the final pick of the 2nd round because of Miami lost that 1st round pick, so everything slid up. Right. So they virtually had 3 second-round picks, and 2 of them were spent on defensive tackles, which is really interesting to see at a place that early on in the draft to double up on. You got Jerron Dexter from the University of Florida. Then they go with Zach Pickens, defensive tackle from the University of South Carolina. So, and those were 2 guys that, you know, there was a reason why they were in day 2. They had some concerns. And then a guy like Tyreek Stevenson, who's really, really impressed so far in camp. So there seems to be a good amount of optimism around him. Plus, I think what helps with drafting him is you can take a guy like Kyler Gordon, who was a rookie last year, really, really solid. He seems to be more natural at playing the nickel rather than an outside corner. So you kind of get almost 2 starters out of that. You can play Stevenson outside, kick Gordon inside, and then you have a much better setup there with your corners. You have Jalen Johnson on one side, Kyler Gordon and Tyreek Stevenson on the other side there. So there's your front 3 in the secondary. And then backing up behind you still got Eddie Jackson. So that's still a really, really solid secondary. And then I think what really had me the most excited was the pair of 4th round picks that the Bears had. in Roschon Johnson from the University of Texas and Tyler Scott from Cincinnati. Roschon, obviously a really, really interesting study because, like I mentioned earlier, played behind Bijan Robinson, didn't get as many carries, actually started at Texas as a dual threat quarterback, if you can believe it. And then Tyler Scott, really small guy, but the dude is just an absolute burner and could be a really, really interesting slot receiver, especially with the Bears took Velus Jones Jr. last year in day two. I can't remember if it was the second or third round, but there's been concerns about him not really sort of living up to the expectations. Perhaps there could be a really interesting battle between Scott, between Jones. I think those are two really dynamic playmakers. And I know we were talking about linebackers earlier in that group, and they bolstered that as well in the fifth round with Penny Sewell, obviously the younger brother of your guys' own Sewell in Detroit. But
I mean Noah Sewell. Penny Sewell with the Lions, but you guys got Noah Sewell. Yeah.
We got Noah Sewell. You guys got Penny Sewell. I was gonna say, why can't I remember the guy's name in Detroit? I know it's a Sewell. But getting Noah Sewell out of Oregon, linebacker as well with him. And he was a guy that a lot of people were kind of interested in, kind of played his best football in 2021, but had a sort of a regression in 2022, had his draft stock, a reason why he was taken on day 3. But I think he's a really nice depth piece.
Let's touch on the Roschon Johnson piece then a minute. That addition is probably huge because you figure you're pairing him with Khalil Herbert. Herbert, took a good chunk of the carries and a good chunk of the workload last year. How are you feeling like the running game's going to be this year with the Bears? We talked briefly about Montgomery being gone. You've got a great draft pick here, it appears, to go with Herbert. I guess you guys are feeling probably pretty good.
Yeah, I think this is, if you were to ask me the question, what is the group you're most interested to watch this year in terms of development and where they go? I would say it would have to be this running back group because obviously the Bears last season, they had an abysmal passing offense, but they had an excellent rushing offense, one of the top 10 in the league. Obviously, a lot of that thanks to Justin Fields and his ability to scramble and, and he's gone for 60, 50, 70 yards or what have you. So I think that's a group that's really interesting to see because it seems like a very consensus approach of the idea that, there is no true running back one. This is going to be a running back group by committee. And I think it kind of gives an indication, of where we are in the running back game. I think this is sort of the future of what running backs look like, of having 2, 3, maybe even 4 if you're really lucky, or you have the way you build your roster, that it's going to be a running back by committee group. And I have confidence in Khalil Herbert that he can fill that quote unquote running back one role, or at least be the starter, be consistent with carries and things like that, even though I just said it's a running back by committee group, because I think he's got good support and backup behind him with a guy like Roschon Johnson filling in.
I'll circle back to the Jahmyr Gibbs draft pick question you had, and I think it ties in perfectly here. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, it's kind of like a 1A, 1B guy. They both have slightly different skill sets. If you looked at the Lions last year with Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift, you kind of had a similar situation. Now, Swift got hurt more, so he missed more games. So you didn't have as much of an even split, and Jamal Williams got more carries because of that. But I think that's what you're going to see. They're both slightly different running backs. They can both receive well, but Montgomery's going to be the guy inside a little bit more, and I think Gibbs is going to be the outside guy. And they're both receiving threats, but I think Gibbs takes the receiving threat to a different level.
Gotcha.
I want to switch over to your quarterback, Justin Fields. The national media puts a lot of praise on him. And now I also know the national media runs the same storylines over and over on things, and they don't always get into the deep dive on and getting the good issues in that, because I see how they cover the Lions, and I see that all the time, and there's holes in it sometimes. So you've seen training camp this year. You saw Fields grow throughout the season last year. How is Justin Fields looking, and what's their perception from the Chicago fan base?
Yeah, I think still, I mean, it's the fact that I wish I would have looked this up because it's just crossing my mind now, but I can't remember the last time the Bears had a consistent starter at quarterback for 3 years in a row. Like, obviously he didn't start, during his rookie year. Obviously Andy Dalton was that first guy, but then he became the starter later on. But to just have this consistency at the quarterback, the city hasn't seen it since 1985. So I think that's just why the Bears, and obviously being, the third biggest market in the country behind Los Angeles and New York, why there's so much hype, excitement around this, because the Bears just simply haven't seen it. Bears fans haven't seen this in their lifetime. The greatest Bears quarterback of all time, statistically, is still Jay Cutler. Whatever your thoughts on Jay Cutler are, bad or good, like, that's just the honest truth. He has the most passing yards of any Bears quarterback of all time. That was the greatest part of the luxury of this offseason with all the free agency and with all the draft capital, is that they didn't have to spend any of it on a quarterback or trying to, find a quarterback in free agency, trying to find one in the draft. They're still paying Justin Fields rookie money. But I think that was the biggest thing with his development, is just the fact that, he's got health. I think that's just the biggest thing Bears are excited about. The way that the relationship between him and DJ Moore is being talked about by virtually everybody, whether it be media, whether it be the team. I don't think I've ever seen something like that of, hey, this is going to be something special. Like, this isn't, this is exactly what the Bears were looking for when they made this trade, and why they were willing to forego an extra first round pick and get DJ instead, because they knew how good this connection would be. And, DJ Moore kind of pairs well with the Justin Fields situation, because he's been an incredibly successful receiver. But you look at his list of quarterbacks that he's played with, it really hasn't been all that great.
No, he's put up good numbers despite that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's where you're seeing sort of the core has been solidified with Justin. And obviously he still has some things to work on, just getting the ball out faster. And obviously that's still tough when playing behind an offensive line that allowed the most hurries in the NFL last season. But some of that is the line's fault. Some of that is Fields' fault. And obviously having a sort of a rotating door of wide receivers last year, Darnell Mooney was expected to be wide receiver number 1. He gets hurt in the season, misses a good chunk of the year. They get Chase Claypool. Obviously it's tough to join a team mid-season, get to learn their playbook, be productive, and things like that. So you have the addition of DJ Moore. You had your clear wide receiver number 1. Rising tide sort of lifts all boats in that sense of, you get this guy, he makes everyone around him better. You get a defined wide receiver number 2 in Darnell Mooney. He comes back. Chase Claypool being wide receiver number 3. That's a solid trio that you could really build off of. I'm curious to see how everything kind of pans out with Claypool too. I think he's probably the person I'm individually, running backs are the most interesting group. I think individually he's the one I'm most interested, because he's been very clear of understanding of living up to expectations. I didn't play as well as I did last year. This is where I need to really prove myself and find myself a way for success to be able to either get another contract with the Bears or pick up some money in free agency.
And he'll also have an entire offseason under his belt with the Bears organization. That also should help with his development and give him a chance to reclaim what he showed early on in Pittsburgh.
So you have a great wide receiver group that's being bolstered. Plus, talked about the running back group. I think, maybe not the most ideal, but still really, really solid. I think they'll be able to figure it out as things go on. Justin himself, and then that offensive line, like we said, one of the worst in the National Football League. Last season, you saw everything addressed with that group in terms of development. Or I shouldn't say everything. I think there's still some questions at center for the time being, just looking at their depth chart. Cody Whitehair currently listed as the first guy for that group, but not certainly not the end of the world. He's an experienced guy, has experience with different positions at the interior offensive line. So not the end of the world, just everything has been elevated with this group. Tight ends as well. I'll touch on that in a little bit. They signed Cole Kmet to his extension. They pick up guys like Robert Tonyan from the Packers, Mercedes Lewis for experience. I mean, that's a trio of, for tight ends that you can't really go wrong with a group like that. So everything is just improved around Justin. So I think that's going to take him even further this year.
The Bears may have finished last in 2023, which they did, but I actually think they're going to be the most improved team in the NFC North and maybe even in the NFC. Now, obviously, having the worst record makes it the easiest potentially for you to have that improvement. But, just briefly, what ways do you think the Bears are going to be better this year than last year?
Everything. I think it's simply everything. Their quarterback is going to be better. I think maybe they take a step back in running back, because again, I still think this is a better group with having David Montgomery. I think any running back group is better when you have David Montgomery in it. The quarterback's going to be better. The running back's going to be better. They have a loaded a tight end group. Still some questions about the offensive line in terms of health and where things get finalized, but they addressed virtually every point in that line. They got a wide receiver number 1 that helps flesh out the wide receiver room in established roles. So I think everything on the offense improves. Got some better improvement on the defensive line, picking up those 2 tackles in the draft, plus getting Yannick Ngakoue, really, really big addition to their defensive end group, because that was something that was not addressed during the draft, because I think just people are understanding how much a good end is a premium in the league nowadays. So once they got through that first round, I think they were like, we'll address this next year at another point in time.
Okay.
And I think they did that with Yannick. That linebacker group, I think, is going to be stellar. And then that secondary, I think, has really finalized itself to be fantastic.
So you said they're going to improve everywhere. You're optimistic and excited that they're better everywhere. What area gives you the most concern, though? If there's an area of concern for you with the team, because no team is without a flaw, is it the offensive line? Is it somewhere else that you're most concerned about?
Yeah, I think it still is that offensive line, because while Darnell Wright, Nate Davis really flesh out the right side, there's still some certain concerns with center and the left side of the ball. Braxton Jones being, a sophomore out of an FCS school like that, he was not really he was sort of expected to be a depth piece. And, obviously now sliding into the starting role, that expectation has certainly changed. And obviously protecting Justin Fields' blind side is an incredibly challenging role. I touched on it with Tevin Jenkins, but the guy just hasn't been able to stay healthy and just stay on the field. That's his biggest challenge. Like I mentioned as well, at that center position, Cody Whitehair, not the end of the world in terms of choice for center, but I think that was a spot that a lot of people were expecting to see addressed during this year's draft, and especially interesting considering that they went with 2 defensive tackles in that second round, and people thinking, hey, maybe it would have been a good idea to spend, instead of getting a second DT, maybe get something on the inside of that offensive line, or just adding something else, just helping to keep Justin Fields upright, because that is just certainly the biggest thing. Because even though the guy's tough, can scramble like all get out, just allowing him time in the pocket, allowing him time to develop a deep throw.
Well, let me turn the perspective a little bit and ask you, and from the Chicago Bears perspective, how are you, and maybe how is the fan base over there viewing the Detroit Lions this season as we go into 2023?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, because I think, at least in my history as a Bears fan, this is the only time, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like where there's been an off season where the Lions have hype around them. And I don't think that's something that a lot of Bears or a lot of folks in the NFC North or the NFL at large are certainly used to. And I think
the hype train's out of control this year. And so I know Coach Campbell's tried to reel it back in, but how are Bears fans, how do you as the Bears view the Lions?
Yeah, at least to me, I think the Lions are, I think that's what just makes not only the Lions, but the NFC North as a whole, where I think this is the most wide open that the division has ever been, because I think there's tons of arguments as to why each team could win the division, but I think there's arguments about why each team will not win the division. I think you look at a team like the Lions, and you saw that hype not last year, hype per se, but watching Hard Knocks last year, that was the first time I'd actually ever watched the show. But like getting to see Dan Campbell and seeing him be a player's coach and just be relatable, and maybe a bit of a psychopath, but I think you kind of need that if you're going to be the head coach of the Detroit Lions. But having that drive and getting that investment from his players, I think
you said it, not me. Just want to put that out there.
Absolutely. But I think you saw the buy-in. I think Mina Kimes had a really great point last year where she said that they were losing all those games, but they were having fun. And I'm a TV sports anchor. I cover a lot of high school sports around here, and I've found that with every successful team, they have fun. And if you can accomplish that and just get a vibe going in your locker room, you're going to be successful. And I think that's the biggest thing that maybe Detroit has on every other team in the NFC North.
All right, so last question here before we get out of here. How good can the Chicago Bears be and in the NFC North? And do you have a prediction for where the 4 teams are going to finish up?
Man, I feel like, like I touched on a little bit, I feel like you could list any 4 teams in order, and I can understand the logic and explanation behind it. I would say that if you were to give me a, rank the NFC North teams, how they're going to finish, I would say, as much as it pains me to say it, and not to boost your ego and say thank you for inviting me on the podcast, I do think Detroit is the favorite. There has been this hype, and I think they're a little bit of a step ahead of where the Bears are going to be next year in terms of development and culture and things like that. I think they just have a bit more experience. Having a guy experienced like Jared Goff still there, and quarterback some nice pickups. Obviously that, as we touched on with that first round, a little bit bizarre, but still I think good players, and I think could be exciting players. Maybe not the most optimal, but could still be really good, really impactful guys. So I'll say Detroit number 1, Chicago number 2. I think the Bears' real year to shine is 2024. I think there's a few things they still need to address. I think this year can be successful. I think they get second place in the division. I think they snag a wild card spot, and I think they really dazzle in 2024. Then I'll say Minnesota number 3. I don't think I was super sold on that group last year, and I think that they just took advantage of a bad division, and that's fine. I mean, a win's a win. A division title's a division title. No team is ever going to complain about that. And then I just think for Green Bay, going from 25, 30 years of Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love, I just think there's way too many question marks around what his development is. There obviously his interest and commitment to him. He got that sort of random 2-year extension that no one really saw coming, because we haven't seen him on the field yet in any sort of real important capacity. So I just think there's way too much concern with what he is going to look like, but it's like nothing about his rise or what he did in college screams to me franchise quarterback. And I'm just not sold on that, and that's why I'm towards the bottom, because they have, at one end you have Detroit, I think has the most known commodities. At the other end you have Green Bay, who has the least amount of known commodities, and that's why I have to put them at the bottom, just because I don't know what to expect. But I think you could say that about all 4 teams, and I think I'm curious what your perspective is. I think this is the most wide open the division has ever been heading into a season.
Oh, it's definitely wide open. I want to quickly touch on that draft, that first round draft. A lot of national people did not love it from the Lions, especially that first night. They got a lot of heat for it. I was one of those people that warmed up to it quite quickly. I didn't see Jahmyr Gibbs coming, but once we made the pick and once I learned a little bit more, I always knew he was running back number 2 on the board for the draft. And I understand that people say you shouldn't draft a running back that early, but I look at any offense that's got a great running back threat, and that sets them apart from any other offense in the NFL. As for linebacker, that was one of the Lions' big weaknesses last year. Getting somebody of Jack Campbell's caliber really elevates, and the rest of the linebacking core is actually elevated this year as well. So I actually loved the whole Lions draft. I think the second and third day stuff even bolstered it more. As far as the overall division, it is wide open. Yes, I'm on the Lions hype train. I'm going to be going to a number of their games. I'm excited, but I'm going to say cautiously optimistic. I'm almost leery because there's been so much praise put on them that it feels like the only thing we can do is waiting for people to see us disappoint. And we haven't been in that position, so we don't know what that's like. But it's going to be a real interesting season. I'm real excited that football is just about here. Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking all about the Chicago Bears and giving us a lot of information.
Anytime. When you want to talk about when these two match up against each other, you want to do a post-game recap or anything like that, I am more than down to join you.
Awesome. That sounds great. Folks, remember, you can catch Michael Tilka, CBS affiliate WIFR TV out of Rockford, Illinois. Look for his stuff online. And folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Get alerts about new episodes. If you're listening in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe as well. It would mean the world. Please tell your friends about the show. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt Soltesiak and find all the episodes at notthesameoldlions.com. Until next time, stay gritty, my friends.